The moment I walked into the private dining room at that upscale steakhouse in Denver, I knew this was not the celebration my stepmom had promised. The table was too formal, the lighting too bright, and there was a man in an expensive suit, sitting at the head with a leather folder open in front of him. My stepmom Claire smiled at me like everything was perfectly normal and said we just needed to discuss some paperwork before dessert. I am Natalie, 26 years old. I work as a financial analyst at a firm downtown, which means I spend my days reading contracts and spotting the kind of fine print that ruins people's lives. So when I saw legal documents spread across a white tablecloth next to untouched bread rolls, every alarm in my head started screaming. My dad had been dead for 3 months. His funeral was barely behind us, and already I was being summoned to sign papers I had never seen before. The man in the suit introduced himself as Gregory, an attorney representing the family's interests. He slid a document toward me, thick and dense with legal language, and explained that it was simply a formality to ensure everyone was taken care of fairly. Claire nodded along like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. I picked up the first page and started reading. My heart dropped somewhere around paragraph 3. The document was a voluntary redistribution agreement. It asked me to transfer 70% of my inheritance, the money and property my father had specifically left to me in his will, into a family trust controlled by Claire. The trust would then distribute funds to her, to my stepbrother Marcus, and to my stepsister Jenna, who were also seated at the table, watching me with expressions that ranged from expectant to smug. I looked up at Claire. She was still smiling, but her eyes had gone hard. "Your father would have wanted everyone provided for," she said softly. "This is what family does, Natalie. We share." I thought about my father, about the man who had taught me to read financial statements when I was 15. About the voice in my head that sounded exactly like his, telling me to never sign anything under pressure. I set the document down carefully, like it might bite me. "No," I said. The room went silent. Gregory cleared his throat and launched into a speech about how contesting this in court would be expensive, time-consuming, and damaging to everyone's relationships. Claire's smile flickered. Marcus leaned forward and said something about how I was being selfish, how Dad would be disappointed. But I was not listening anymore. I was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Claire, Gregory, Marcus, Jenna, and the restaurant manager hovering near the door like he had been paid to keep it closed. "That is a lot of people," I said quietly. Claire frowned. "What?" I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. 5 against 1. You really thought that would work? No one answered. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I had already typed the text before I walked in. 1 word. Now. I hit send. "Funny thing is," I said, setting the phone face down on the table, "I only brought one person too." The door opened 30 seconds later. A woman in a charcoal blazer stepped through, briefcase in hand, expression calm and professional. She nodded at me, then turned to Claire. "Hello, Mrs. Preston," she said. "I am Diana Reyes, Natalie's attorney. I understand you wanted to discuss the estate. If you want to know what happened after that, how this little celebration dinner turned into the worst decision my stepmom ever made, stay with me until the end. I was not always the kind of person who walked into ambushes with a lawyer on speed dial. For most of my childhood, I was just a quiet kid from a split family, trying to figure out where I belonged. My parents divorced when I was 7. It was not dramatic, just 2 people who had grown in different directions, realizing they could not pretend anymore. My mom moved to Seattle for work, a promotion she had been chasing for years, that finally came through at the worst possible time. My dad stayed in Colorado, in the house I had grown up in, with the big backyard and the maple tree I used to climb when I needed to think. The divorce was amicable, as divorces go. They split custody without lawyers screaming at each other. My mom flew me out for summers and holidays. My dad handled the school year, the homework, the parent-teacher conferences. I lived with my dad most of the time, and honestly, that suited me fine. He was an engineer who worked from home before working from home was normal, surrounded by monitors and coffee cups and stacks of paper covered in calculations I did not understand. He was quiet, methodical, The kind of man who read instruction manuals cover to cover and kept receipts in labeled folders going decades. He taught me things other dads might not think to teach their daughters. How to read a bank statement. How to calculate compound interest. Why you should never carry a credit card balance if you can help it. He made me sit with him while he did his taxes every April, explaining each form like it was a puzzle we were solving together. Money is not just numbers, he used to say. It is choices. Every dollar you spend is a choice about what matters to you. Make sure your choices match your values. I did not fully understand what he meant until years later, but the lessons stuck. When I was 12, he started dating Claire. She was everything he was not. Loud, social, always planning some dinner party or weekend getaway. She laughed at everything, even things that were not funny, and she had a way of making my dad smile that I had not seen since before the divorce. She had 2 kids from her first marriage, Marcus and Jenna, who were a few years older than me, and treated me like furniture from the moment we met. Marcus was 16 when they started dating, already taller than my dad, with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. Jenna was 14, pretty in a polished way, obsessed with her phone and her appearance and what other people thought of her. Neither of them seemed interested in getting to know me. When we were forced to spend time together, they talked over me or around me, like I was a piece of the scenery they were waiting to redecorate. I tried to like Claire. I really did. My dad seemed happier when she was around, less buried in his work, more willing to leave the house and do things that did not involve spreadsheets. He laughed more. He worried less. For the first time since my mom left, he seemed like he was building something instead of just maintaining what was left. When they got married a year later, I stood next to them at the courthouse and smiled for the photos, because that was what good daughters did. I wore a dress Claire had picked out and held flowers that smelled like a funeral. I told myself this was a good thing, that my dad deserved to be happy, that eventually we would all feel like a real family. I was wrong. But something changed after the wedding. Claire started redecorating the house, replacing my mom's old curtains and rugs with things she picked out herself. She moved my dad's office into the basement so Marcus could have a bigger bedroom. She planned family vacations that somehow never included me, because I had school or because the timing did not work out. My dad noticed. He tried to balance things, taking me on weekend trips, just the 2 of us, setting aside money for my college fund, making sure I knew I was still his priority. But Claire had a way of making everything feel like a competition, and I was always losing. By the time I graduated high school, I was ready to leave. I went to college in Chicago, as far as I could get without leaving the country, and I built a life that had nothing to do with Claire or her kids. I visited my dad on holidays, called him every Sunday, sent him articles about financial planning that I thought he would find interesting. He always said he was proud of me. He always said I was going to do great things. He never said he was sick. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was at my desk, halfway through a quarterly report, when my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. It was a nurse from a hospital in Denver. She spoke slowly, carefully, the way people do when they are about to ruin your life. She told me my father had collapsed at home and had been brought in by ambulance. She told me it was his heart, that he had suffered a massive cardiac event, that the paramedics had done everything they could. She told me I should come as soon as I could. I asked if he was going to be okay. The pause before she answered told me everything I needed to know. I do not remember booking the flight. I do not remember packing a bag, or getting to the airport, or sitting on the plane for 2 hours staring at the seat in front of me. I do not remember the cab ride from the airport, or the way the hospital smelled, or the sound of my own footsteps in the hallway. I just remember walking into that hospital room, and seeing my father lying there, smaller than I had ever seen him. Tubes and wires everywhere, machines beeping in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. His face was gray, his hands were cold, and the man who had taught me everything I knew about being strong looked like he was already gone. Claire was already there, sitting in the corner with her phone, scrolling through something. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. "The doctors say it does not look good," she said, like she was delivering a weather report. "They are talking about next steps." I did not respond. I just walked to his bedside and took his hand. I sat with him for 3 days. I held his hand. I talked to him even when he could not talk back. I told him about my job, about the apartment I had just rented, about the guy I had been seeing who made me laugh. I told him I loved him. I told him I was sorry I had not come home more. On the third night, while I was asleep in the chair next to his bed, his heart stopped. The funeral was a blur. Claire organized everything, which meant it was more about appearances than about who my father actually was. There were flowers he would have hated and music he never listened to, and a reception at a country club he had never set foot in. I stood in the corner and watched strangers shake Claire's hand and tell her how sorry they were. I watched Marcus and Jenna accept condolences like they had lost someone who mattered to them. Even though I could count on one hand the number of times they had visited in the past 5 years, no one asked me how I was doing. No one seemed to remember that I was his daughter, not just another guest. After the reception, Claire pulled me aside. Her face was soft, sympathetic, the mask she wore when she wanted something. "We should talk about the estate," she said. "Your father left some things to sort out. I want to make sure we handle it together as a family." I nodded, too tired to argue, too numb to think clearly. That was my first mistake. The will was read 2 weeks later in a lawyer's office downtown. The room was small, wood-paneled, with the kind of heavy furniture that is supposed to make you feel like important things happen here. I sat on one side of the conference table. Claire, Marcus, and Jenna sat on the other, a united front in matching black, like they had coordinated their outfits for the occasion. The attorney, a man named Patterson who had worked with my father for years, opened a folder and began to read. His voice was steady and professional, but I could see him glancing at Claire occasionally, like he was bracing for a reaction. My father had been thorough, more thorough than I ever knew. He had updated his will multiple times since marrying Claire, always making sure to separate what was his before the marriage from what they had built together. Colorado is not a community property state, which meant he had more control over where things went, and he had used that control carefully. The house, which he had owned outright for 15 years before Claire came along, went to me. His investment accounts, the ones he had started funding when I was born, went to me. His life insurance policy, which he had taken out when I was a baby and updated regularly to keep pace with inflation, went to me. There was also a letter. Patterson handed it to me separately, explaining that my father had asked him to deliver it privately after the reading. I slipped it into my bag without opening it, not wanting to cry in front of Claire. Claire got the joint accounts they had opened together, the furniture she had picked out, and a modest sum that my father had set aside specifically for her. The total came to about $200,000, which sounded like a lot until you compared it to what I had received. Marcus and Jenna got nothing. They were not his children. He had no legal obligation to them. And according to Patterson, my father had been very clear that he did not want his estate used to fund their lifestyles. The total value of what I inherited was just over $1.2 million. The house, the investments, the life insurance, the retirement accounts he had rolled over and managed carefully for decades. The silence in that room was deafening. Claire's face went through about 6 emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, anger, disbelief, calculation, and finally a tight, forced smile. "Well," she said, her voice strained, "I suppose we will need to discuss how to make this fair." Patterson looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Preston, the will is very clear. Mr. Preston was explicit about his wishes." "But surely there is some flexibility," Claire pressed, "for the sake of the family." Patterson shook his head. "The estate has been structured to avoid ambiguity. Natalie is the primary beneficiary of the assets Mr. Preston held separately. Any challenge would be difficult to sustain." I watched Claire's jaw tighten. I watched Marcus whisper something to Jenna. I watched the gears turning behind their eyes as they realized that the money they had been counting on was not coming. After the meeting, Claire caught my arm in the parking lot. "Natalie," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk about this. Your father would not have wanted things to be so uneven. Think about Marcus and Jenna. Think about me. We are your family." I pulled my arm free gently. "I need time to process everything," I said. "I will be in touch." I got in my car and drove away without looking back. That night, I called my mother in Seattle and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then said the thing I needed to hear. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing, Natalie. He spent his whole life planning for your future. Do not let anyone guilt you into giving that away." I did not know it yet, but those words would become my armor. The pressure started small. A text from Claire asking if I had thought about her proposal. A voicemail from Marcus saying he just wanted to talk. An email from Jenna with a long, emotional paragraph about how hard things had been for their family and how my father would have wanted everyone to be okay. I responded politely at first. I said I needed time. I said I was still grieving. I said I would be in touch when I was ready. But the messages kept coming, and the tone kept shifting. Claire started hinting that there might be legal complications if I did not cooperate. She mentioned lawyers, court fees, the stress of a drawn-out probate battle. She said she did not want things to get ugly, but she also could not let her children suffer because of a will that did not reflect reality. Marcus sent me a message that was less subtle. He said I was being selfish, that I had always thought I was better than them, that I was stealing from his mother. He said I would regret this. I started saving everything. Screenshots of texts, recordings of voicemails, printouts of emails. My father had taught me that documentation was the difference between being believed and being dismissed. Then the invitation came. Claire called me personally, her voice warm and friendly, like the past few weeks of threats had never happened. She said she wanted to put everything behind us, that she had been stressed and said things she did not mean. She said Marcus and Jenna felt terrible about the tension. She wanted to take me to dinner, just the family, to celebrate my father's memory and start fresh. She named a steakhouse in Denver, one of those places with private rooms and wine lists thicker than novels. She said she had already made a reservation. Something felt wrong, but I could not put my finger on it. Part of me wanted to believe she was sincere. Part of me still wanted a family, even a broken one. I called Patterson, my father's attorney, and told him about the invitation. He was quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Natalie, I have seen this before. When someone cannot pressure you privately, they try to do it in a setting where you feel outnumbered. Do not go alone." He gave me the number of Diana Reyes, a litigator who specialized in estate disputes and family conflicts. I called her that afternoon. Diana listened to everything: the will, the messages, the threats, the dinner invitation. When I finished, she asked one question: "Do you want to end this or you want to win?" I thought about my father, about the years he spent building something for me, about the voice in my head telling me to never sign anything under pressure. "I want to win," I said. "Good," Diana replied. "Then here is what we are going to do." The plan was simple. I would go to the dinner. I would listen to whatever they had to say. I would not sign anything, agree to anything, or lose my temper. And when the moment was right, I would text Diana, who would be waiting in the restaurant's main dining room, ready to walk in and change the entire dynamic. The night of the dinner, I drove to the steakhouse with my heart pounding and my phone fully charged. Diana had told me to dress professionally, to speak calmly, to let them make the first move. She said people like Claire always overplayed their hand when they thought they were winning. The hostess led me to the private room in the back. The door was heavy, soundproofed, designed for conversations that were not meant to be overheard. Inside, Claire was already seated at the head of the table, looking like she was hosting a charity gala. Gregory the lawyer sat to her right, documents spread in front of him. Marcus and Jenna flanked the other side, dressed like they were attending a funeral instead of a dinner. And then there was the restaurant manager, hovering near the door like a bouncer at a club. Claire stood when I walked in, arms open for a hug I did not want. "Natalie, sweetheart, I am so glad you came. Sit. Sit, we ordered appetizers." I sat. I did not touch the food. Gregory wasted no time. He explained that they had drafted a family settlement agreement, a way to ensure everyone was provided for, without the stress of legal battles. He said it was standard, reasonable, the kind of thing families did all the time. He slid the document across the table. I picked it up and read it slowly, letting the silence stretch. Every clause was designed to strip away what my father had left me. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split. The investment accounts would be transferred to a trust controlled by Claire. The life insurance would be redistributed to cover family expenses. By the time I finished reading, I felt cold. "This is not a settlement," I said quietly. "This is theft." Claire's smile tightened. "Natalie, that is dramatic. We are just trying to be fair." "Fair?" I looked at her. "My father spent his entire life building this for me. He updated his will 6 times to make sure it was clear. And you want me to sign it away, because you think you deserve it more?" Gregory jumped in, his voice smooth and practiced. "No one is saying you do not deserve anything, Natalie, but your father also had obligations to his wife, to his stepchildren. The court might see things differently than you expect." "Then let the court see it," I said. The room went quiet. Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping to something harder. "You do not want to do this, Natalie. Legal battles are expensive. They are public. They can damage your career, your credit, your reputation. We are offering you a chance to walk away with something, instead of losing everything." I looked around the table, counting them again. 5 against 1. A lawyer, a stepmother, 2 stepchildren, and a manager who was probably being paid to keep the door closed. "That is a lot of people," I said. Claire frowned. "What?" I met her eyes. 5 against 1. You really thought that would work? Before she could answer, I pulled out my phone. The text was already typed. I hit send. "Funny thing is," I said, "I only brought one person too." 30 seconds later, the door opened, and Diana Reyes walked in. The look on Claire's face when Diana introduced herself was worth every sleepless night I had spent worrying about this moment. Diana was calm, professional, and completely unintimidated. She set her briefcase on the table, pulled out a folder of her own, and laid out everything I had been documenting for weeks. The threatening texts, the voicemails, the emails demanding I redistribute my inheritance. She explained, in clear and simple terms, that my father's will was ironclad, that he had specifically structured his estate to prevent exactly this kind of challenge, that any attempt to contest it would fail and would likely result in sanctions against whoever filed. Then she looked at Gregory. "I assume you advised your clients of the risks before drafting this agreement?" Gregory's face went red. He stammered something about exploring options. Diana nodded. "I thought so. For the record, if this document is ever presented to Natalie again, I will file a complaint with the state bar for attempted coercion. And if any of you contact her outside of formal legal channels, we will pursue harassment charges." Claire tried to recover. She said this was all a misunderstanding, that they just wanted to talk, that Diana was blowing things out of proportion. Diana did not blink. "Mrs. Preston, you invited your stepdaughter to a private room, surrounded her with people, and presented her with a document designed to take 70% of her inheritance. That is not a conversation, that is an ambush." She turned to me. "Natalie, we are done here." I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out without looking back. In the parking lot, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my car. Diana stood next to me, steady and calm. "You did well," she said. "They are going to be angry, but they have no legal ground to stand on. Your father made sure of that." I nodded, unable to speak. "Go home," she continued. "Lock your doors, change your passwords, and call me if anything happens." I drove home in silence, replaying the evening in my head. The look on Claire's face, the way Marcus had shrunk in his chair, the sound of Diana's voice, cutting through their lies like a blade. For the first time since my father died, I felt like I could breathe. The retaliation started 3 days later. At first, it was small things. My credit card was declined at a grocery store. My bank called to verify unusual activity on my account. I received an email from a service I had never signed up for, asking me to confirm my identity. Then I got a notification from my credit monitoring app. Someone had tried to open a new line of credit in my name using an address I did not recognize. My stomach dropped. I called Diana immediately. She told me to freeze my credit, change all my passwords, and document everything. She said this was not uncommon in family disputes where one side felt they had nothing left to lose. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of controlled panic. I contacted all 3 credit bureaus and placed freezes on my accounts. I changed every password I had, using a password manager my father had recommended years ago. I set up 2-factor authentication on everything. Then I installed security cameras. It felt paranoid. But Diana had warned me that people who felt cornered sometimes did desperate things. I bought a Ring doorbell and 2 small cameras for the windows, setting them up to alert my phone whenever motion was detected. For a week, nothing happened. The cameras showed delivery drivers and neighbors walking dogs. My credit alerts were quiet. I started to relax. Then, on a Thursday evening, my doorbell camera pinged. I was in the kitchen making dinner when my phone buzzed. I opened the app and saw a live feed of my front porch. Claire was standing there. She was alone, dressed in yoga clothes like she had just come from a class, holding a manila envelope. She glanced around, then slipped the envelope through my mail slot and walked quickly back to her car. I did not open the envelope. I called Diana. She came over that night with a paralegal. They photographed the envelope, documented the camera footage, and opened it with gloves. Inside was a letter, typed and unsigned. It accused me of manipulating my father, of isolating him from his real family, of poisoning him against Claire and her children. It said I had stolen what rightfully belonged to them. It said I would pay for what I had done. There was also a printout of my home address, my work address, and my car's license plate number. Diana's face was grim. "This is harassment," she said, "possibly stalking. We need to file a police report." The next morning, I sat in a police station and explained everything. The officer took notes, reviewed the camera footage, and said they would investigate. He warned me that without direct evidence that Claire had written the letter, it would be hard to press charges. But he also said something that stuck with me. People who do this usually escalate. Keep documenting, keep your cameras on, and do not engage with them directly. I went home and did exactly that. The escalation came 2 weeks later. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an alert from my banking app. Someone had attempted to access my account from an unfamiliar device. The login had failed because of 2-factor authentication, but the attempt had been made. I pulled up the details. The IP address was local. The timestamp was 2:47 p.m. I checked my doorbell camera. At 2:45 p.m., a car had pulled up to my building and parked across the street. It was Marcus's car. I could see him in the driver's seat, laptop open, face illuminated by the screen. 2 minutes later, my bank recorded the failed login attempt. I screen recorded everything. The camera footage, the bank notification, the timestamps. I sent it all to Diana. She called me back within an hour. "This is enough," she said. "We are going to the police, and we are going to court." The next few weeks were a blur of statements and filings and meetings with investigators. Diana built a case that connected the harassment letter, the identity theft attempts, and the coordinated effort to pressure me into giving up my inheritance. The police traced the IP address from the failed login to Marcus's home network. They found evidence that Claire had purchased my personal information from a data broker, including my social security number and previous addresses. The charges were filed on a Monday morning. Claire and Marcus were both named in complaints for attempted identity theft, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper and anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Diana. Claire and Marcus sat on the other side with their attorney, a different one this time. Gregory had apparently decided this case was too messy for his reputation. Jenna sat in the gallery behind them, looking like she wished she was anywhere else. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She reviewed the evidence methodically, asking questions, taking notes, showing no emotion. Diana presented everything: the threatening messages, the harassment letter, the camera footage of Claire at my door, the login attempts traced to Marcus, the data broker purchase, the original ambush at the steakhouse. Claire's attorney tried to spin it as a family misunderstanding, a dispute over grief and money that had gotten out of hand. He said his clients had never intended to harm anyone, that they were simply trying to ensure fairness. The judge was not impressed. She ruled that the evidence showed a clear pattern of harassment and attempted fraud. She noted that my father's will had been properly executed and that Claire and Marcus had no legal claim to the assets in question. She issued a restraining order prohibiting Claire and Marcus from contacting me, coming near my home or workplace, or accessing any accounts in my name. She ordered them to pay restitution for my legal fees and the cost of the security measures I had been forced to install. She also referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. When it was over, I walked out of that courtroom into the bright Colorado sunlight and stood on the steps for a long time, just breathing. Diana stood next to me. "Your father would be proud of you," she said quietly. I thought about him. About the man who taught me to read contracts and question everything. About the voice in my head that had guided me through the worst months of my life. "Yeah," I said. "I think he would be." In the months after the verdict, my life slowly returned to something like normal. Claire and Marcus faced criminal charges for the identity theft attempts. The district attorney took the case seriously, especially after Diana presented all the evidence we had compiled. Claire pleaded to a lesser charge and received probation, community service, and a fine that forced her to sell the house she had redecorated with my father's money. The house she had spent years making her own, erasing every trace of my mother and my childhood, went on the market 3 months after the trial. I did not feel satisfied watching her lose it. I just felt tired. Tired of the fighting, tired of the lies, tired of the endless energy it took to protect myself from people who were supposed to be family. Marcus got a suspended sentence, but lost his job when his employer found out about the charges. He had been working at a financial services firm, which apparently took a dim view of employees who committed identity theft. Last I heard, he was living with a friend in another state, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. I did not feel sorry for him either. Jenna reached out to me once, a few months later. She sent a long email apologizing for not speaking up, for going along with her mother's plans, for treating me like an outsider all those years. She said she had not realized how bad things were until she saw the evidence in court. She said she had always been scared of her mother, scared of what would happen if she disagreed. I read the email twice, then archived it without responding. Maybe someday I would be ready to forgive her. Maybe not. That choice was mine to make, and I was not going to rush it just to make someone else feel better. I kept the house my father had left me. The house where I had learned to read and ride a bike and climb the maple tree in the backyard. I paid off the mortgage early using part of the investments, just like my dad would have wanted. Then I hired a contractor to undo some of Claire's renovations, restoring the kitchen to something closer to what it had been when I was a child. The wallpaper she had chosen came down. The cabinets she had painted went back to their original color. The fancy light fixtures she had installed were replaced with simpler ones that reminded me of the ones my parents had picked out together, decades ago. The first night I slept in my old bedroom, I lay awake listening to the house settle around me. The creaks and groans of old wood, the whisper of wind through the trees outside. It felt different now. Quieter. Safer. Like my father was still there somehow, watching over me from somewhere I could not see. I finally opened the letter he had left me. Patterson had given it to me at the will reading, and I had been carrying it in my bag for months, afraid to read it. It was short, just 2 paragraphs in his careful handwriting. "Natalie, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry I could not be there to help you through whatever comes next. I have done everything I can to protect you, but I know Claire will not make this easy. She never liked that you reminded me of who I was before her. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. And remember that family is not just blood. Family is who shows up for you, who protects you, who loves you without conditions. Build that kind of family, and you will never be alone. I love you, Dad." I cried for an hour after reading it. Then I framed the letter and hung it in my office, where I could see it every day. I started therapy a few months later. I found a counselor who specialized in family trauma and grief. Someone who did not flinch when I told her my stepmother had tried to steal my identity. We met every week in her small office with the soft lighting and the tissue box that was always within reach. We talked about boundaries, about guilt, about the difference between family and people who share your last name. We talked about the ways I had been trained to accommodate Claire, to shrink myself to make room for her, to accept crumbs of affection and call them love. Family is supposed to protect you, she said once. When they try to destroy you instead, you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to grieve the family you wished you had while protecting yourself from the family you actually got. Those words became my mantra. I started building a new life. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the years of drama. I joined a hiking group that explored trails in the mountains every weekend. I adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt from a shelter who followed me everywhere and slept at the foot of my bed like a guardian. I called my mom in Seattle every Sunday, the way I used to call my dad. We talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding a relationship that had grown distant over the years. She flew out for Thanksgiving, and we cooked dinner together in the kitchen I had restored, laughing about old memories and making new ones. I was not the same person I had been before my father died. I was stronger, warier, more careful about who I let into my life. But I was also more certain about what I wanted and what I deserved. My father had spent his whole life teaching me how to protect myself, how to read contracts, how to question everything, how to trust my instincts even when everyone around me was saying I was wrong. In the end, that was his real inheritance. Not the money, or the house, or the investments, but the knowledge that I was worth protecting, the courage to say no. The understanding that real family does not ambush you in private rooms or try to hack into your bank account. If there is one thing I learned from everything that happened, it is this. Blood does not entitle anyone to your future. Shared history does not give someone the right to take what you have built or been given. Love is proven by how people treat you when there is something to gain, not by how loudly they claim to care when they want something from you. My father spent his entire life planning for my future. He updated his will. He documented everything. He wrote me a letter that I still read when things get hard. He made sure that when he was gone, I would have the tools to protect myself from the very people who were supposed to love me. The inheritance he left me was not just money. It was the knowledge that I deserved to be protected. It was the courage to say no when everyone around me was saying yes. It was the understanding that real family does not ambush you in private rooms or try to hack into your bank account. If you are reading this and something feels familiar, if you have a family member who treats your boundaries like suggestions, who makes you feel guilty for protecting yourself, who hints at consequences when you do not give them what they want, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not a bad son or daughter or sibling for refusing to be manipulated by people who happen to share your last name. Document everything. Change your passwords, freeze your credit, get a lawyer if you can afford one, and trust the voice in your head that tells you something is wrong. Even when everyone around you is saying you are overreacting. My stepmom invited me to a celebration dinner and tried to trick me into signing away my inheritance. What she did not count on was that my father had already given me something worth more than any amount of money. The knowledge that real family protects your future. They do not try to steal it.